Hello everyone, welcome to Warhammer 40K Darktide. Today I want to talk about a mechanic in the game that I feel is situational at best. Before I rant about this, please keep in mind that this is merely my opinion on the matter, purely developed by my own experience and playstyle. It's totally okay if you disagree, and in fact, I encourage you to tell me about your thoughts in the comments. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get right into it. If you have played the veteran sharpshooter, you may have seen the level 20 feat named Camo Expert. This feat states, while standing still, enemies are less likely to target you. Well, what does that mean exactly? See the symbol at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen? This tells you when Camo Expert is active. This symbol simply becomes grayed out or faded when it's not active. So what options do you have when actively using this feat? Ranged and melee combat is perfectly fine, as this doesn't deactivate Camo Expert. Looking around and crouching also does not cause this to happen, but any movement and dodging negates this effect. Before we move on with pros and cons of Camo Expert, let's quickly look at the other feats. Unwavering Focus grants us an extra 75% toughness damage reduction from ranged attacks during volley fire. And Duck and Dive grants us 30% stamina while dodging, sprinting, and sliding to avoid ranged attacks. Both feats grant their merits, but are straightforward unlike Camo Expert. We will refer to these later. The craziest thing about this perk is the adrenaline rush you get when you see this feat doing its job. Camo Expert doesn't just make enemies less likely to target you. What I mean by this is the feat's ability to make the enemies retarget someone else other than you. There are multiple times where I am being rushed down by a horde and I simply stood still and watched them walk away from me, turning their attention to someone else in the party. Oftentimes during hordes, I find myself sitting in the corner of a doorway, hacking away. The enemies have troubles pathing around me as I melee them down and buying time for my teammates with the AoE arsenals to start cooking the enemy. In ranged combat, you'll find enemies turn their guns to your friends as you line up headshots. Pretty useful for when you run into squads of ranged combatants. This brings me to my next point, survivability. With an active Camo Expert taking a ton of pressure off you, you can line up proper headshots on your priority targets, removing threats before they get to your frontlining comrades. With the majority of hordes pathing away from you, it opens up a line of sight on far more threatening elites and specialists. Taking up the firepower behind the front line will significantly lengthen our survival. A healthy sharpshooter will at worst soften up even the most armored of foes. Camo Expert also grants us with something I feel is drastically overlooked, that being the ability to play the objective. There are moments where you're in an open room with multiple entrances for enemies to pour out of, giving the forces of chaos the advantage. The party often resorts having to clear the area before finding enough of a lull to begin hacking again. Although that's usually the most solid plan, staying in the area longer would also mean more enemies will spawn. More enemies means more damage dealt to the team, and that just draws us closer to a team wipe. Camo Expert can change this exchange to a few minutes. While you sit there and hack, Camo Expert is indeed active. There are times where my party gets relentlessly swarmed down and there's no time to breathe. That's when Camo Expert lets me play the objective, just standing there hacking the terminal while surrounded by enemies.
Can't believe that you didn't get hit during that.
Yeah, same, honestly, we were hitting swarm.
Lastly, I felt this feat was entirely necessary if you're trying to complete the Overwatch Penance. This penance requires you to not take any melee damage on Malice difficulty or higher. With so much pressure being lifted from you by Camo Expert, your only job should be elite killing, such as Maulers, Ragers, and even those pesky Poxwalkers that spawn behind you. Look behind you often, and stick with the team. This penance wants you to lean on your teammates to take the brunt of the aggression, and Camo Expert will let that happen while you stay in a good position. Wow, alright, that's quite a few Maulers. That's five of them in the train.
Yep, this. Oh!
Wow!
Oh, that was a well-timed pox burster.
With the pros out of the way, let's talk about the cons of Camo Expert. So we talked a lot about taking aggression and pressure off you, but where does that go? It goes one of two ways. If your teammates are close by, enemies will target them instead. Or if they aren't in a good position for the enemies to see, they may even just attack you anyways. Not to mention, some enemies may even attack you regardless of the situation, leaving you in some pretty awful positions. Camo Expert doesn't work 100% of the time. If you're someone who likes to switch between the other classes, Camo Expert is probably not for you. Darktide is a game where dodging and your movement is one of the most key components to your survival. If you aren't doing that, you'll probably be dropped very quickly. Perhaps you are a sharpshooter main, so this won't be of concern for you, but Camo Expert basically just throws that muscle memory out the window. It's a very different playstyle. I often struggle to remember that I had Camo Expert at all, and continued to dodge like my life depended on it. Darktide always has the players transition from zone to zone. During these transition periods, you run into various enemies in which Camo Expert is probably not active. There are even enemies that are very good at making players move out of position. Bombers, hounds, flamers, the usual flanking type enemies. Perfect ways to turn off Camo Expert just long enough to displace and punish the team. The best time to utilize Camo Expert is to stick with the team, but if the team is split up and you don't notice it, you will quickly turn into Swiss cheese. All in all, I like Camo Expert. I think it's a really fun and interesting way to play a veteran sharpshooter. But if I have, in any way, influenced you to not take this feat, you have some pretty decent options. Unwavering Focus is straight damage mitigation from ranged attacks while your ultimate is online. Personally, I feel this would be a really strong choice if you are running the level 30 feat Counterfire, as it will be easier to sustain your ultimate while also able to tank a firing squad. Duck and Dive looks underwhelming at its first glance, but for a level 20 feat, Duck and Dive has the most amount of potential. While performing dodging, sprinting, and sliding maneuvers, it returns 20% of your stamina when you avoid gunfire. With some practice, you could move quickly between zones or cover and still be able to fight, especially useful when you need to fight and block melee attacks and dance around those sniper lasers.
Catch him. I don't know if I did. Got somebody.
There's a dog!
Holy shit.
I got you, buddy! Well, that about wraps up my opinion on Camo Expert. If you have any experience with Camo Expert, let me know in the comments. Good or bad, I would love to know your opinions. Throw me a like if you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in our next purge. But until then, bye-bye! Oh, I almost forgot. We have our first ever community event in which the community worked hard to complete. So definitely use those promo codes and get some free fashion. June 2nd around 8 o'clock UTC is when the new mission will drop. I can't wait to jump in since the new Throneside mission was such a beautiful map. I will leave the promo codes and the link to where you can redeem them in the description below. Anyways, goodbye, farewell, and hope to see you in our next purge.